Hey guys, my name is Christian. Welcome to Mix It and Fix It. Today I thought that I'd go through how to edit and grid drums in an efficient and easy way. So let's get started. Alright, so before we begin here, I just want to give you one general advice, and that is to stay away from all sorts of time warping and time stretching. In my experience, that can introduce weird artifacts like out of phase behavior between the different tracks, and I truly believe that the method that I'm going to show you here today is far superior, and as long as the drumming is okay, you'll get a seamless result without any artifacts whatsoever. So the exercise of today here is to edit the drums 100% to the grid. And this is just to demonstrate and show you how to do this properly. But you can of course then adapt and use this method however you like. So let's start off by listening to the unedited drums. Alright, so the very first step here is to group all of the drums because we want to edit the drums as one unity. There is one exception to this rule, and I'm going to show you this a little bit later, but that is more about troubleshooting. So the basic principle of this method is that we are going to slice up the transients and move them around to the grid. And in this case, I'm using Pro Tools, and it has a very effective way of doing this using a plugin called Beat Detective. The baseline of this method is the same, but Beat Detective will help us detect the transients, cut them up, quantize, and then crossfade all within Beat Detective. I would also recommend you guys to do it a few bars at a time because it's easy to get lost if you are doing large and complex songs. So we're going to capture the selection. I'm going to choose 16 notes. I'm going to use the low emphasis algorithm, but if you feel that it's not covering the hits properly, you can try to use the other ones as well. I'm going to push analyze, and then we're going to use the slider here to adjust to just cover the kick and snare hits. Then I'm going to use the trigger pad at 10 milliseconds, which means that I'm going to cut up the transients 10 milliseconds before the actual hit. I'm going to push separate, which is going to cut up all of the hits automatically. Then we're going to go to the clip conform menu, which is Pro Tools' way of quantizing. But you can also push Control 0, which is Pro Tools' way of quantizing to the closest note value. As you might see here, we have some gaps in between the hits. And these need to be filled and crossfaded, otherwise we'll get very weird artifacts. So Beat Detective has something that is called smoothing, which is going to fill and crossfade the gaps. So if you remember, at the previous menu, we set the trigger pad at 10 milliseconds, and now we're using 5 milliseconds to crossfade the different regions, which means that we won't crossfade the actual transients. Alright, so let's listen to the result. Alright, so that was pretty much perfect. But if you detect anything, if you hear anything wrong, you can just move around, and the most important thing is that you crossfade here between the hits. So let's move on to the second part of the song. We're going to do capture the selection. We're going to analyze the hits, and he's playing well, so I don't think we missed any hits at all. We're going to push separate, go into clip conform, push conform, which means that we are quantizing all of the hits. We're going to smooth to fill up the gaps, and then we are going to listen. So I think that that sounded fine, but there is one thing that I'm going to show you here, which is the exception to the rule of editing all of the drums at once. And that is when we get a flam on the kick and snare, which is very common if you have double kick drum and snare playing at the same time. So this hit here, you have the snare on the grid and the kick is slightly behind, which sounds like this. Then we're gonna move the kick, crossfade, and listen again. Edited, unedited. So the difference is fairly small, but these things kind of build up and will get very obvious if you add samples on the snare and kick and get a very modern mix. You kind of hear that out of phase behavior, and it definitely sounds more punchy when the kick and snare is locked in. If you don't want to do this and keep a more natural feel, I would always suggest that you grid the snare and have the kick slightly behind the snare. That will sound better. If the kick is before the snare, you get a weird kind of flam out of phase sound. So the snare should go on the grid and the kick slightly behind if you want a more natural feel. Alright, so in short here, you group all of the drums, you slice up all of the hits, you move them into place. If you get a hole like this, you'll fill it up and you crossfade, and that is basically it. Alright, so that's really it for today's episode. If you enjoy this kind of content, please like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you guys around.